So I have another React practice problem for you all. If you're a beginner or kind of intermediate, you want to just practice how well do you know React, how well are you good at problem solving. I think this is a pretty good one. So the problem is, imagine you're at a grocery store and you have 5 checkout lines. Or the idea in the UI is I want to add an input up here and maybe a button. And I want the user to be able to type in the amount of items they have. So for example, they could put a 10 here, and they could say like add to queue. Or I could say checkout. Okay. And the idea is when you press the checkout button, I want you to loop through and find the queue with the lowest amount of people and their items. So for an example, let's say there's a person in this line. I'm gonna do circles for people, and the queues will be actual like, let's say that this person has 5, this person has 3 items, this person has 10 items, this person has 1 item. When you click the checkout button, I want you to push the user or the shopper with 10 items into the queue that has the least amount of items. Okay, so in this case, it could go either here or it could go here. Now, if all these were filled up, then obviously it would probably go to the 1. And then what I also want you to do in this problem is I want you to every half a second, I want you to simulate removing 1 item off of the first person in the queue until their items are done, and then you can delete them. So for an example, after half a second, this will become 2. After another half a second, this will become 1, and then it should become 0, and I want you at that point to delete this person, and this person should move up. So this is the visualization that we actually want to see in React. We want to see these numbers decrement and then get them off of the queue when they're done. So that is the problem. I would recommend that you try to solve this yourself, and I'm going to solve it right now live for you all so we can all maybe learn something from this. All right, I got a Vite app set up for React. Let's just go ahead and start with the easiest thing first, which is probably adding the input. I'm gonna go ahead and just add a form here. And inside the form, we'll add an input, and we also need a button that says checkout. Let's make sure this shows up. Okay, we got an input and we got a checkout. Good. Again, check, what are we trying to do? We're trying to see if we can get an input and a checkout button. And when you're dealing with React, you need to kind of hook this input up to state, so it could be a controlled component. I'm gonna go ahead and just add in some state here, and I'll say like items and set items. Okay, start with the easiest thing first, which would be how do you keep track of the user entering some items and pressing a button. So going to the input here, let's just go ahead and say like value is equal to items, and I'll say on change. This is how you can basically tell an input to invoke a function when someone types. And I'm going to go ahead and get the event that comes out, which is a react.change event. And this change event has a ability to get a value from it. So I'm going to say set items to call that setter function up here. And I'm going to say e.currentTarget.value. So that'll basically, every time the user types into the input, we're going to go ahead and just put that in state. Now, one thing I would recommend doing is have your React DevTools installed so that you can visualize, is this actually set up correctly? So I'm gonna go ahead and click on app. That's where our state is stored. And I'm gonna type in here, and it goes ahead and it prints out 10 in the state. So this is good. Now I will say that we don't want a string here. We want an actual number. And it would be cool if people could like not type in letters here. So it's good. Like if you're actually like doing this in an interview, which I don't know if this is going to be like a real interview question or not, I doubt it. It's good to like make sure you talk about these edge cases out loud and let the person know that you're thinking about like the what ifs. Like what if someone types in ZZZ and clicks enter? Well, you don't want that to happen. So let's try to limit this so they can't type numbers. How do you do that? Well, you go to the input and you say type. And you say, I think it's either number or numeric. Number. So now they cannot type letters, right? You made this system much better and they can only type numbers. Awesome. Also, we want to make sure that they actually type something in. So let's make sure that it's required. You have to type something. And then also, instead of setting the string here, because notice when I click 10 here, it still sets it to 10 down in state. We don't want that. There's actually something called, I think, number value, or there's actually something called value as number. And this thing needs to be set to, we'll say like undefined. Okay, let's just make it 0 so that type error will go away. Okay. So now we can actually type in a number here and everything will be good. And then going back to our state, notice that it actually stores the numeric 10. That's important because we're going to use that 10 later on, and we want to store a number, not a string, inside whatever data structure we choose. So yeah, we kind of solved this problem. We got a checkout input. You could style it a little bit if you want to. I don't even care about styling. I think solving the problem is more important, solving the logic. So now let's try to figure out how do you make 5 different checkout lines. So let's go ahead and figure that out. So underneath the form, we haven't even worried about submitting the form yet. We'll worry about that in a second. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some state here. We want to keep track of 5 things. So I'm going to say lines and set lines. In fact, yeah, we'll do that. And I'll say useState is equal to an empty array. Now, since we want 5 of them, I'm going to use an array to kind of represent our queue. So I'm going to put 5 arrays inside that one array. All right, so this is like a 2D array, and we have 5 queues, 5 lines that are nested inside that main array. So we want to display something to the page by using the lines. How do you do that in React? Well, you say lines.map, and then you can get the people who are currently in each line, which we don't have any people yet. So let's just go ahead and render out like a div here, and we're going to put like an X, just so that we can visualize that, hey, is this actually working? Now there is a syntax error. I think first of all, we probably need to add a key to this thing, or else my ESLint's not going to be happy. And secondly, let's try to figure out what we're missing. I think it was a parenthesis we're missing, so I'll add that back in. Cool, so now we should at least see 5 X's print out to the page. There we go, we got 5 X's, so we know we're on the right path, right? Again, when you're doing challenges, just make sure you add a couple lines, save your file, check your browser. Add some lines, save the file, check your browser, because the longer you go without checking your code, the faster you're going to break stuff, and it's just going to be very hard to debug. Okay, so now what I would say here is inside of app itself, I'm going to change the layout, because remember the problem says these lines need to be below the inputs. Let's just go ahead and change the layout of this a little bit. And I'm going to go to app CSS, and I'm going to go to this. And I want to say flex direction is going to be column. And that should push a div here, and then this other one should have a div here. Okay, so you might ask, well, why the X is all in a column? Well, we have to style those as well. We haven't done that yet. So let's go back for code, and I'm going to go and wrap this whole thing in yet another div, and I will call this lines. And you might as well just add a class while you're at it here, so we can style this one too. I'll call it line. So we have a container called lines that keeps track of a bunch of lines. That was kind of confusing saying out loud, but let's go to the CSS and let's do lines. And again, I want to make 4 columns or 5 columns. There's different ways you can do this in CSS. There's grid or there's flexbox. You can kind of pick what you want to do. I'll try doing grid at first. So I'll say grid. I'll say display grid and then grid template columns. And I think you could do repeat. I think it's 1FR and then 5. I always forget if the 5 goes first or the 1FR. So save your code, go to your browser. If it doesn't work, then you probably just have something swapped and you need to kind of go back. So now we got 5 columns. And I'm actually going to add some gap to this. I'll add 20 pixels of gap just to space them out. And again, you don't have to be 100% with what you're trying to replicate. Like, okay, this has boxes, we have X's. It's fine. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep this as simple as possible, and you can come back later and style it if you really want to. I don't think people would dock you points if you focus on the logic first. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to basically add the ability for someone to type in a number here, such as 10, and I want to push that into one of these lines. So how do we do that? Let's go back to the code, go back to our form. Now, when a user clicks the form and tries to submit it, we need to keep track of that event. So there's a way in React to say on submit, and we're going to basically get, we're going to call a method here. So let's just make a function. I'll say like handle add items. How about that? Or actually, let's make it more specific. I'm going to say add items to line. Or add person to line. How about that? Does that make more sense? It's always good to kind of think about your naming and like make it more verbose. Like right now I'm second guessing if we should call this items or if I should say items in person's cart, right? It's a little bit more verbose, but I think it reads better than just items. Like if I call this like items in person's cart, and then this could be set items in person cart. It's a lot more verbose and people might cringe at this, but I think this kind of explains it a little bit better of what's going on. Anyway, so when we submit the form, let's just go ahead and call this. And here is going to be a react.form event. And then I can say HTML form element, I believe. And we should probably e.prevent default, because if you don't do this, the whole page will refresh and basically blow away all your state. We don't want that. So we're going to go ahead and e.prevent default. That's something you're going to do in React basically on every form. Other frameworks like Vue have the ability to say .prevent here, and it does that logic for you. Very nice. I don't know why React. Well, you know, let's stay on topic. So when you want to add the person to the cart or add the person to the line, what we need to do is we want to loop through all lines. We want to find the line with the least items. And then we want to basically push the items in person cart to the line. Okay, so it's always good to like write out some pseudocode or some to-do list bullet points, so you have like a higher level overview of like what do you need to do, because this is going to be the hardest part of this problem, I believe, is just like adding this stuff in. And then we have to go and render out all the items in the line too. So how do you loop through all the lines? Well, I'm going to make a let here. I'm going to say line with least, and that's going to be equal to null. Or you could just not define it if you don't like the null keyword. And then I'm going to loop through every line. So I'll just say for let line of lines. That'll loop through every line. And then I want to sum up how many items are in the line, right? So if you know JavaScript, there's a reduce function you can do to sum up an array. I might do that. So I'll say like const total in line is equal to line.reduce. And now this function is a little bit confusing to first understand how to do it, but it's good to learn it because when you do it, it makes code a little bit easier. We want to basically tally up a sum, and then also, let me rephrase what I'm saying. The reduce function takes a callback function, and those take the parameters of sum, then the current element that you're at. So for example, this thing had 10, 5, and 2. When this callback runs, value is going to be 10, and then the next time it's going to be 5, and it's going to be 2. So we want to basically add these together. Well, how do we do that? We're going to say sum plus value. Okay, and that's going to basically add all these numbers together. If this is a little bit confusing to you, I would go and like practice learning reduce, because it is confusing to learn at first. But let's make sure this works. So again, every time you make small changes, just go ahead and print some stuff out, do a debugger, make sure it works. So this should at least print out, let's see, 16, 17 to the console when I press the button. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a 10 here. And I'm going to go to my console and I'm going to click checkout, and it should have printed 17, and it did. So we know it's working, but we did get an error. Reduce of empty array with no initial value. So I think because it hits this array and it has no values in those, it's breaking. So we need to put in an initial value of 0 here so that it can actually like sum up the thing. So I think now it should print 17, and then it should print 0, 0, 0, 0. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to keep track of the line that has the least amount. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to go ahead and just say if total in a line is less than line with least, I'm going to add one called least found. Least items amount. How about that? And I'm going to set this e to the 9. I'm going to make it a really large number. You could potentially make it this like max number.infinity or something. But I'm going to say, as we're looping through the lines, check if the current total is less than the one that we have stored. And if it is, we're going to keep track of which line had the least, like that. Okay, so now if I were to print out the line down here, we should get an empty array because one of these has the least, and it's going to be probably this one. Okay. Actually, let's print out line with least, not line. Okay, so now if I were to do this, it should print out an empty array. And just to visualize that a little bit more, I'm going to go ahead and print out 1, 2, 3, 4. And what should that actually print to the console? 1. If this is working correctly, it should print out 1 to the console. Let's go back here, and I'll just go ahead and click checkout. And it printed out 4. Okay, so our logic is actually not working the way that we think it would. So we'll have to figure out why that is. So let's loop through this. And then what you could also do is flex your knowledge with the debugger. Like if this is like a legit interview and you can show how to step through with the debugger, that's just a perk. Okay, so let's just step through with the debugger and try to figure out what's going on. So line with least is undefined. Least items in amount, or least items amount is 1e to the 9. We're going to step through by clicking the step button, and then we're going to loop over every line one by one. So the first line we get is 10, 5, and 2. We step over that and we get a total of 17. Is 17 less than that? It is. Now we're going to store that line that we just found, and we're going to do it again. Now, I just found my issue. The issue is we don't keep track. We're not resetting this, right? So if we did find a minimum, we got to reset this, right? So let's go back, and I'm going to say this is equal to the total in line. Okay, so now I think we're good. So I'm going to get rid of this debugger keyword. I'm going to refresh the page real quick, and we're going to click on checkout. And I want to show you that it should print out 1. There we go. We got an array, and the element was 1. So we found how to find, we figured out how to find the line with the least amount of people, or the least amount of items. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to push in the items in person's cart. So the thing that they had typed into the input, we want to push that into that line. So this is a little bit tricky in React. I mean, like if you're using Vue or Svelte or something else, typically you could just push in like this. So like the line with the least, the one we found, you could just potentially push in a new item in the cart. But unfortunately with the way React works, like it's immutable. And so this isn't the proper way to do it. And I am getting a TypeScript error, which this one should be defined. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to do this so I don't get TypeScript errors. So if this is not defined, I'm just going to go ahead and return. This should never happen unless there's a bug in this code. But let's just do it so we don't get TypeScript errors. And I'm going to push in the line here. This is not the proper React way to do that, but we will figure out the proper way in just a second. So the reason that this is not the proper way is that React is immutable and it expects you to pass in new arrays. So I'm going to have to say set lines, and then we need to use the current lines that we have. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say set lines, and then I'll say previous lines like this. And then we are going to basically say previous lines.map. And so this is a trick that you can do in React to update things in place. We want to basically update this one, and we want to change it to a new array that equals 1, 2. Okay. We don't want to just push in something here. This is not the proper way. So let's do it the proper way so you guys don't blast me in the comments. But I'm going to go ahead and say previous lines.map line. And then I'm going to say if the current line we're looking at is equal to the line with the least, right? So by reference, if they're the same, then what we're going to do is we're going to return a new array that has the same things with the line. And then we're going to add in items in person's cart. Otherwise, we're just going to return line. Oops. Line with least. Line with least has an implicit any type. Okay, so this is complaining about TypeScript. I need to give this a number array so that it doesn't complain. And variable line with least is used before being assigned. Do I need to give this undefined? This is sometimes I hate TypeScript when you have to like deal with this dumb stuff. But I guess it makes our code proper, so. Okay, so anyway, we have this typed out, so it's not complaining anymore. And what we're going to do is we're going to clean this code up a little bit because it's not the most concise code. So I'm going to do a ternary here, like this. And instead of just like doing all the extra code, we're going to do this. We can get rid of the curly braces, and get rid of that. And this should basically do this exact same thing, but it's less code. It's easier to read, in my opinion. So we loop through the array. I know this is kind of confusing if you're a beginner, but we loop through the array. And then for every element, we check if the array we're looking at is the same reference to the minimum one we just found. Like if they're the same, then we're going to replace that in line like this with a new array. Now this still won't work because I believe, actually I think this will work because I think map will return a new array anyway. So let's actually make sure this works. Let's go back to the UI. We made a lot of changes, and again, like check your code before you just start doing stuff. Let's type in 10. This is complaining because I just backspace stuff, so we can try to fix that too. I'm gonna click checkout, and this one should have added something to our lines. Okay, and I think it is adding. And if I actually went to React state, again, if you use this component thing, it really helps you debug what's going on. We're going to click on this. I want to make sure that it is adding numbers to stuff. So if I did a 5, it should add it to the 3 one. There you go. So the logic is working fine. Now the issue is that we're not displaying it to the UI. We haven't even implemented that. So sometimes you think you might have implemented something and you never actually implement it. So let's go ahead and try to implement that. We actually solved all this. I think this is good. Let's go down here. So we need to actually render out on every line. We need to render out the number again. So we're going to do, we have to loop again. We're going to say people. Actually, I might rename this to line. So I'll say line.map. This will be items. And then for every item that we find, let's just do another div that says item. Number of items. How about that? Okay, so now if we go back, we see the numbers print out. This is good. Now, let's just go ahead and make sure this works. I'm going to add a 1 here. That adds it to the lowest. You can keep adding 1 to the lowest. So I think we solved that part of the problem. Now, the last part of the problem that we were asked to solve is like every half a second, can you decrement every line by 1, basically. So the cashier is swiping people's, items, and then they get checked out. And then at some point, you should remove the number. So how do you do that? Well, let's stress your knowledge on use effect. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say use effect. And we want to basically, when this component mounts, I'm going to go ahead and set an interval like this. And we want to do some logic every half a second. So how do you do half a second? You do that. Okay, it could be 500 milliseconds. I like to do 1,000 divided by 2, so it's more obvious that this is half a second. But we want to keep track of the interval so that we can clean it up, like show that you actually understand how to clean things up in React. So I'm going to say clear interval. When this component unmounts, we want to clean up the interval so it's not just firing over and over again when we're not even using this component. So we're going to do that. And now what do we want to do in this interval? So what we want to do in this interval is we want to update the lines basically and just reduce the first element by 1 every time. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to say set lines, and then we're going to say previous lines is equal to, and then we want to do some logic. Again, we want to reduce the first item by 1 in each line. Okay, so in React, again, you have to return a brand new array. And typically, map is going to be your best friend when you're dealing with React. So we're going to map over every line like this. And then for every line that we find, we're going to basically return a new line, but with the first element decremented by 1. So I'm going to go ahead and just say ... line. But then we do want to basically decrement the first element. So I could probably say .slice. And then the first element, if there is one, -1. That makes sense. Again, I'm just playing with the code. This might not be my final solution that I get to, but there's probably a cleaner way to do this. I just haven't thought about it yet. Okay, so this should take the first element, and then it should reduce it by 1, and then it should slice it out. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pull some of this stuff out because there's some things we want to check. The first thing we want to check is I'm going to say decremented by 1 is equal to this. And then I want to make sure that if this thing is below 0, we don't want to add it anymore. And actually, I could, now that I think about it, I could just filter. So let's actually undo this. I'm going to say filter, and I'm going to say value. I want to make sure the values are always greater than or equal to 0. Okay. So a lot of stuff going on here. Again, let's just see if we can return some implicit returns here. Same thing with this. Okay. Now just filter, let me put on a new line. No. So let's take a step and look at this. Does this code seem right? So every half a second, we are going to update all the lines. We're going to set the lines to the previous lines, and we're going to map it over a new function callback. For every line, we basically just decrement the first element by 1. And then we append the rest of the things to the line. And then we want to filter out anything that's less than 0 by saying filter value greater than or equal to 0. Actually, let me make that greater than 0. So it's always good to double check your code. Like I just did, I did have a little syntax error. Well, not syntax, I had a semantic error that would have done the wrong logic. So it's good to make sure you check your stuff. So let's make sure this works. I'm going to go ahead and just check the console because I do think it's crashing. Let's see, refresh the page. So it's actually decrementing. I might change this instead of every second. I'll do instead of every half a second, I'll do every second. And yeah, pretty cool. Now it's kind of hard to visualize the lines because we're like deleting everything. So what I might do is go back to the CSS and I'm going to give this a line. I'm going to give this a width of 50 pixels and a border of 1 pixel dashed white. How about that? So now we can actually like visualize the line a little bit. And what we're going to do as well is we want to text the line center all the stuff inside the line. Cool. So now if we add stuff in, okay, it is slowly decrementing the thing off the top, and then it pops it, and then it just continues to do that. And I can add things to the lowest line. If I'm at Costco and someone has 180 items, well, let's see where it's going to put me. It puts me over here. So I think we solved the problem. Now there is a little bug, and I would definitely fix any bugs you see. This issue comes from when I basically delete, I believe. Okay, the specified NaN cannot be parsed or is out of range. So I think in down here where we say value as number, I'm going to actually default this to, I think I might need to default it to 0 here so that error does not happen. Okay, so that kind of prevents us from going. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, to be honest. Oh, we should probably make sure it's positive too. Okay, so now I can't even backspace. That's kind of not useful. Okay, so this error, how do we fix this error? So basically we want to check if it's not a number. So when a user backspace, it's going to call this, and then it's going to try to call this setter, and it's going to make it like the issue is that this thing is not a number, so we can't really call it. So let's try doing this. I'm going to go ahead and just say, if this is equal to NaN, actually, I think I do this, is not a number. Well, it's failing at somewhere else. Okay, let's just do this. I'm going to say if e.current value is equal to nothing, else we'll do this. Trying to play around with the code, make sure I understand what I'm doing, because I don't think I understand what I'm doing right now. But instead of saying value as number, I'm just going to say value. Or sorry, I'll say current value. Okay, I can't pass it because this thing requires a number. I'll say number or undefined. I'm also going to show when I add that number or undefined, this thing throws an error. So I'm actually going to say if item in cart is equal to undefined, just return. We could probably check for like less than as well, like, or if this is less than or equal to 0, return. Like we don't want to add 0 items to the cart, right? We don't want to add negative items to the cart. So make sure you add those error checks. I think it just makes you, it kind of just highlights the fact that you are thinking about edge cases, like I said before. Now, if this is not defined, I'm just going to put undefined here. And that should hopefully fix some of our issues. Let's see, if I were to backspace on this, now I get a different warning. And I'm also getting a warning about the key thing. So let's fix the key one. This thing needs to be another like line index. And I'm going to go ahead and say line index. Okay, so that should get rid of that. And then when I delete, the form is now uncontrolled. So like, how do we fix this? Well, I think we need to go back to the input. And instead of saying undefined here, okay, you know what? I don't really know. So I'm going to go ahead and just say we solved the problem, and someone in the comments can figure out what I need to do to like not have this throw a warning when I delete. I thought I was on the right track, but obviously not. So I'm gonna deal with just living with this error. Okay. This is one of those things where I'll probably have to Google around, try to figure out a good solution for it. I can't think about it on this live coding session, and I think that's fine. I hope someone went and dock you points because you can't figure out how to prevent this error from happening. But I guarantee you it's a really simple solution. I just can't think of it. Like, I think this challenge really stresses your ability to deal with effects, intervals, cues, pushing stuff dynamically to things, decrementing. Like, I think we covered a lot in this challenge, and I think it's a pretty cool challenge because it kind of simulates a real life scenario of like people trying to get their items scanned in a shopping center. So yeah, if you enjoyed watching, give me a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, press the bell icon, and like always, I have a Discord channel if you want to talk to me directly or just find a place to kind of ask questions or chat with other developers. And I also have a newsletter you can subscribe to that I try to publish tips and tricks about web development at least once a week. So be sure to check that out in the description. Have a good day and happy coding.